Stories. Logs are stories. Whenever I read logs, it's all about the narrative. I want to know what happened, so I open logs. But let me ask you a question. It's a big room. Thank you for coming so late. Who is reading logs as they're part of the everyday job? Right? Okay. Who is using Kibana, Logs.io, Datadog, all kinds of? Cool. Actually, the real question is who enjoys reading logs? Haha, less hands. Who feels at home with Kibana? I get smirks here and there. Some people are happy, but others are uncomfortable. So the real question is, why can't it be pleasant for everybody? Before we dive into that, let me tell you a word about myself. I just had my 46th birthday, which makes me a late Gen X, I suppose. I'm a self-help enthusiastic. I'm a self-taught person. I'm an Agile Evangelist, and I'm a role player. I've been programming professionally since 1999, professionally since 86 something. Here is a kind of technologies that went under my hand. I stopped updating the list in some point, but I still have the animation, whatever. I've strong affinity for infrastructures, and lately I've been helping design work processes for humans to provide good quality using technology. I'm using Node.js in production ever since version 0.6, which is a while. A lot have evolved since then. JavaScript has been my first language in which I've become really proficient. I'm a technological consultant at Tikal by day. Tikal is basically a technological home for experts or people on their way to become experts. As experts, we are encouraged to have a wide view of the market, a wide view of the industry, and bring that experience into the customers and bring value from edge to edge. And in the night, I'm a specific kind of artist. And this means to say that I'm not a guru. I'm not here to tell you what's right and wrong. I'm only offering my humble opinion together with my experience. You may learn from it what you may. What we'll be having today is basically a short gist of something that I do, a much longer session that takes me about 3 hours. I will try to give you the core gist that asks the questions, and hopefully we'll have some time for some hands-on specific for Node. And we'll start by asking who really reads logs, who they are for. By understanding who reads them and what they expect to find in logs, we can adopt better approaches that improve the control that we have over our software, and when applied correctly, saves time, money, CO2, frustration, and reduces risks. Now, it's hard to make generic observation about logs of all running code, whatever it is, yet I will still make an honest attempt to list the stakeholders of logs and what they're trying to find in them. I'm confessed that I'm a little biased towards servers, but I'm addressing the entire software, and I'm confessed that I am biased towards developers, but I am trying to address the entire software development team. And logs start with developers. Actually, no. Developers starts with logs. Everybody starts with this hello world thing, but dear developer, have you ever thought, who were you greeting? Who are you talking to? The problem with logs is the problem with code. You know the code quality paradox? Great code, by definition, once it's in production, will never get appreciated. It will never be read. Now whether we ever take the bother of going through it. Why? Because it does everything great. If somebody is reading it, it's already because he's not doing what he's expected to do or does not do enough. So it's the same with logs, just a little worse. Why it's worse? Because we've all been there. There's CI, there's CD, and we see a build rushing to production with the commit message, improving logs. But that's already a solution to a problem that should not have been there in the first place. The big problem is when developers do not comprehend that logs are a part of their product. Even if your logs do not address your end users, they are addressing somebody. And even if currently it's just you, it's naive to assume that it will always be you. It's just not scalable. Because you kick off a startup, you're 3 people, you're doing all by yourself, and before you know it, there's an ops guy next to you. He wasn't there while you wrote your logs. He doesn't know what's going in there. Now, ops guys do not lark over logs. It's not their business. They have much more important things to do. But they do want to know for us, for our sake, several things. They want to know that the server started up correctly, that it shut down gracefully without leaving any impending transactions in the air, without locking. He wants to know that your data migration completed successfully. He wants to know that your batch job persisted from start to end without being kicked in the middle. And for that, they turn to logs. They also read logs when KPIs went out of boundaries. Most commonly, request per second suddenly drops, or memory increases, or CPU is busting, or they get a peak on the error rate, and then they go to the logs and try to understand what the hell is going there. And we can give them some hint. Now, if you develop a product that is deployed on-premise, you are on a far worse ground. On-premise means that somebody else is deploying your code onto their cloud. There's this ops guy reading your logs, all frustrated, doesn't know what is this thing, and you're not there to tell him, hey, bro, it's just a warning. They also read the output of command line tools that we built for them, but not because they're ops. That's because they're users. We'll get to users in a minute later. First, we need to cover support. Now, sooner or later, you will need them, and they will have access to logs. You will want them to have access to logs because you want them to be able to close as much customer tickets before they interfere with your backlog. Because you want your backlog to be filled with new features. They may be code-oriented, they may be not, but in the end of the day, they are thinking minds with a job to make sense of all what they find and give a customer a solution to a problem. Now, you can't afford to be ambiguous with these guys, because you'll be amazed how far the stories that they make are far from the truth. Could get far from the truth. So they tell the stories to users. Now, users, we are, as developers, are also users. We're using command line tools. We're using test runners, coverage tools, benchmarks, build and lint tools, great. NPM, package managers, they are command line tools. Now, imagine what would have happened to a community of developers if you would say, NPM, install, express, click enter, and then the cursor goes like this. And time passes, and after a while, a new prompt line appears. Like MV or CP, you know? Terrible. If I would meet in a situation like this, I would be pissed. I want to know what's happening inside. I want the tool to tell me what's going on. I want it to be transparent. And I want it from every software I run, including my database. So let's take it one level up. Actually, we need to acknowledge that a service is a command line tool that binds ports, binds I/O. The I/O keeps it alive. If not, it wouldn't exit like any other command line tool. An application is a command line tool with a GUI. You think you're running it through a shortcut, but under the shortcut, there's the entry point in the form of the command line entry point. And they all have logs, your messages, your Zoom, your IAQ, your ICQ, whatever you used to use, they all had logs, and if you're a technical person, you might have found them. The next stakeholder of logs, basically, is data analysts. They get a bunch of logs, a whole lot of logs, and they get a quest to derive from them some business value. These guys look for patterns, cling to whatever they can find to construct a narrative and back it with data. Now, they just might as well miss this that you spot to the screen, or they find it and save to themselves what they think of it. But with these guys, ambiguity costs more than just the clarity. First, their salaries rivals the salaries of experienced tech leads. The equipment that they use is expensive and produces tons of CO2. And in the rate of 1 tera per hour, would you like them to tell you how much of this 1 tera is your diff? Right. That is a new field emerging called FinOps, like fin operations. And not far from today, they will tell you not only how much of this 1 tera is your diff, or AAA, exclamation mark, and all those kinds of things that we find in logs, but also how much it costs the company and what is its CO2 footprint. So hopefully, once the analysts are done with their research, there is a mechanization process. Now the queries which means that these queries are ran over and over and over, sifting through the same lines, deciding that they are not necessary. Which brings us to bots. When I say bots, I mean batch jobs. ETLs, data reducers, AI training, visualization reports, KPI monitoring, on top of which there are alerts, on top of which there are escalation screens, on top of which there are automated responses, like version rollback if something really went bad, or scale management, behavior analytics, and the list just goes on and on. You know this scene in Fight Club? You know, when they got this guy and they tell him, we cook our meals, we hold your trash, we connect your calls, we drive your ambulances, we guard you while you sleep. That's what bots is doing for us. Making log entries recognizable and traversable for machines pays a great deal. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Right. Hackers. They're not really interested in whether your software works as expected or not. They want to know what valuable information they can extract from your logs. Which means logs, sadly, often become a channel through which sensitive data may leak out. Sensitive data varies from operational secrets such as host names, APs, API keys, DB passwords, go through private user data, whether it is regulated or not, and ending with indication of exploitation. If you wrote into the log the versions of your third-party libraries, you actually also wrote to the log what vulnerabilities came with them. But the hackers are not the true stakeholders of logs. Their true stakeholders are the users, the software team, the owners, and their requirement is to minimize the risk implied, if not eliminate it entirely. Our last stakeholders, QA. I include them last because they are kind of a bit of everything. They have to be a bit of everything. They get your build, they run it, they browse through all the outputs, which includes logs, and they interpret them to determine if the software works as expected or not. There is no middle. Not kind of get to production. No. In the better scenarios, QAs are indeed an integral part of the development team, and they know personally every log line, but this is sadly yet far from the norm. In the even better cases, QAs knows what log entries to expect and what they mean to downstream jobs like purchase complete, which you can count and base a KPI on. Sadly, as a whole, we are not there yet as an industry. Project managers and ops and QAs do not know to require log entries, and developers often neglect to provide them. So, in the majority of cases, logs are kept unmanaged, unchecked, hung on goodwill, and on personal initiative. And then you get a lot of startups that gives us like a APM and all these log analyzers which bring a technological solution to a cultural problem. Now imagine what if you would have both. Right. So as a developer, you want QA to be able to find your problems before they get too far and cause harm. As QA, you want to know the logs. You want to be able to understand them and find the problems, and you want to be able to trust them. As project managers, you want to make the managed requirement of the software that is tested against a quality bar. Now, let's ask where logs come from. We'll skip that part because it's completely wrong. It's not about counting sheep. It's about tracking ships. In the age of sail, they would throw a piece of wood, aka a log, into the water, and the log would float dead in the water as the ship sails away. The log would be bound to a string, and the string will have knots in it, and that will measure the speed of the ship. And they will do it periodically, because there's nothing you can see except for blue horizon and the occasional star. You need to know where you are. Your life depends on it. So they will do it periodically and append to a ship journal a line with the time, the direction, and the speed that was measured. And from that word, we got logging, which means append a line to a journal. That's logging. Fast forward a few years and we got this. These are magnetic memories. Now, I would love to tell you stories about Alan Turing reading the state directly from the memories, but I would leave that to Uncle Bob, and you should all watch Uncle Bob. Right. Soon enough, those boards became so small and so stacked that it's impossible to know what inside, even if you could read. So we had to find a way to let machines tell us what's going on. And the solution that we found is line printers. LPT1, LPT2. Half of you don't know even what that is, but never mind. It's an append-only, one line at a time interface. That's what impacts the form of logs today the most. Yeah, I know about punch cards. There were further iterations. Let's stay relevant. So that's where logs came from and how far they are back with us. But being that old in a modern industry, they have evolved. But many of us have not. Do you know the story about the moved cheese? You take a mouse, you train it to find a cheese inside a maze. You will wake up every morning and happily run to that spot and eat the cheese and life is great. And then you move the cheese to somewhere else. And the mouse runs to the place, it doesn't find the cheese. You continue looking, find the cheese and eats it, and then everything is happy for the mouse. But if you do that to a person, he will go, even if it will take me to the rest of my days, I will prove to you all that the cheese has to be here. Right, sorry. Application logs are shrouded with misconceptions, rooted in the past. To take advantage of this evolution, we need to acknowledge these misconceptions and the cost that they harbor so we can shake them off and adopt modern trends that bring modern benefits. The first misconception is that logs are side effect. Now stop. I'm not talking about functional programming. I don't care how you write your code. They will produce logs and they have to be treated seriously. The big problem is when developers do not comprehend that logs are a part of their product. But I already said that, so let's move on. It's completely wrong. The next misconception is that logs are files, which is wrong. I mean, they used to be in some point. But already 20 years ago, I was working with log appenders that wrote to SQL tables over the network. No files involved. I mean, there are files in the database, yada, yada, whatever. But we used to write SQL queries to query logs, which is kind of stupid in terms of today, because it means that the application is knows to write logs only to an SQL database. It becomes so coupled with it. And it means that we ship to production the ability to write to an SQL table, even if it's not necessary. Or not, so no. The modern approach is that application should just provide the log stream, and it's up to the user, in case of service ops, to handle everything from there. Not log rotation, and not file appending, and not file shipping, not concern of your app, especially in the world of microservices. Well, our next misconception is that logs are text. Well, kind of, they used to be, but that's wrong. We just kept doing what we did before. Remember the line printer? We had to shove everything to a single line. No, we don't have to do that anymore. That's limiting. Even though they tell narrative verbally, there are no longer message strings being printed as text, but events. Not only that the texting about is no longer the essence of it, it's quite often not even text. Even when they are text, there are still representation of data structures, like any NLP programmer will tell you. Despite logs being string of events, we still shun loggers without string format capabilities as low-feature logs. And this haunts us until this day, which is very sad. The result is that people are using these features to address humans, where on the other hand, the real stakeholders are machines. And they get context-dependent structure that is tainted in human syntax, which is harder to parse, harder to index, and harder to search. All these pronouns and embedding values inside strings and plural, singular form, record with braces s found. Why? No. The takeout is that application should emit logs as structured data that keep parsing obvious and generic. Probably JSON, doesn't have to be. And for microservice architecture, you should prefer a logger that includes the minimum, the bare minimum to do just that. Next, logs are red raw. Wrong. Okay, command line tools are red raw. But let's look a little deeper. We've already been through the color revolution that makes our life so fun. Logs emit colors, but they also emit JSON. What does it tell you? There are layers inside. There are layers. The application logic deals with emission. There's something else that handles presentation. And in the case of command line tool, I will ship them both. But in the case of microservices, no. There should be a takeout for the microservices that you should prefer. That the modern world log formatting is not a concern of the application. It is reduced to data structuring. You give event, structured. Next. Now, the only one that still read rows are developers, and I hope that I will get to show you something interesting about it later. The next misconception, that it's just one more log entry. In the same block, I get one log entry here, one log entry here, one log entry here. Why? I need to define to add something, so I add a new log debug. Why? No. Maybe in command line tools, if they are not run as part of a pipeline. And then their log are being packed and shipped to a data lake 1 tera per hour. No. In short, every log line emitted is processed further down the road. Now let's take the most benign case. Most benign case is I get a service, producers go over to Elasticsearch, Kibana, Stack, whatever, and there's a browser. So the application logs emits, and it's been serialized, then it's shipped over the network. On the other side, it's been parsed because it was emitted through some stream, and then it's been modeled, then it's enriched. What's enriched? Adding all this Docker instance name and the Kubernetes cluster and all these labels that we spit on and some things that the apps is not aware of and should not be aware of, and it's good this way. And then it's been indexed and then it's been persisted. All this happens once for every log line. And every time we want to read whatever log line, we are reading all that, we are parsing all that, we are filtering all that, we are serializing all that, and then we ship it across the network into your browser where it's being parsed again and modeled. Why modeled? We can select fields on this Kibana stuff, and then it's been presented. Awesome. I'm not saying it's bad. I just want us all to understand what's happening under the hood and consume it wisely. Now, why would we address logs? What do we want to find there? Let's make the bottom of the bottom. Basically, we need to validate correct execution in time of development, in time of QA. If it's too late, then we want to troubleshoot a root problem, and then we want to monitor KPIs. If we didn't do the design work correctly, then we need to do KPI research in order to be able to extract this data from logs. And we want to do all that safe, secure, and minimal cost. And this brings us to the verbosity challenge. Because in the end of the day, there are two opposing viewpoints. One of them wants the bottom line, the big picture, I want to know that everything is fine, and the other depends on the detail. Now, how to reconcile these two is a whole new discussion that I don't have time in our few minutes. I want you to take from here this. I want you to own your application logs like you own any of its features. Yes, they have to be coded, tested, checked, cleaned, sanitized, secured, maintained, but it all starts with management. I mean, not in the management like manager tasks, like as a team, we want to say that it's our own and we want to manage it like any other of our software feature. Specifically to Node, and we got left with just 7 minutes. Let's see what we'll get to show you. Okay, great. Now where I'm at home is here. Right. Pinot. I already installed Pinot and some other things here. Let's require it. Pinot. Now Pinot gives me a constructor, so I will also invoke the constructor. Means Pinot is not a singleton. And let's see what we get. Okay, so on the top we see some levels, which is a translation of a number to a label and a label to a number. We can see here all the emission methods. We can see here the stream, the underlying string, Sonic Boom, great library. And we can see some instrumentation parts. The most important to me now is here. We will get to see it a little bit later. And we can see some stuff. Whatever. Let's try to use it. Log info. I'm very excited. Very excited. Right. What do we see here? First thing, we see that Pinot took a design decision. I don't want to deal with strings. I want to deal with numbers. Why? What is easier? Where level in warn info there, or where level bigger or equal to something, something, something? What's easier? Obviously, it's easier to filter by a number. The next design decision is that the time is not formatted into string. It costs a lot of time, a lot of memory, string concatenations to produce a date format. No, the date time is must be. It's easier to write, easier to ship. Great. Now we get the process ID and the hostname, yada, 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 and we get the message. This is not a string. I mean, yes, every JSON is a string. Okay, it's a string representation of an object. But what it is, an object. It's an event. That means if I do this, I will get the exact same result. Expect that the time move forwards, whatever. Yes. That means that unlike other logs, Pino says, I want your event first. I will help you if you would like, and I will save you the time to write MSG. Yes, by doing that. Yes, I get my A, I get my M, and I see the message is basically the plot thickens, and it will even do this ugliness because it's just too easy to implement, not because it's recommended. But basically, we got a logger. Wonderful. Now let's see what's this chinding things that I was pointing at before. You see, all these log entries have PID and hostname, PID and hostname, PID and hostname. If we get an object and we serve it to JSON stringify, it will basically try to serialize them over and over and over, even though the result is exactly the same. There's no need to do that. So one of the first optimization that they did, they said that all the strings that will not change anywhere in the future, let's just take it as one string and embed it in the result later. They're also not using the native JSON stringify. They have another model that does it better, and that basically aimed at performance. Next thing is that let's say that I want a request log. So I want the request ID inside, and every time I emit a log guarantee through this request, I want the request ID inside. So we can have a child log, and we say log child, and we say rec ID. Let's suppose that this is some UUID, whatever, and we can say flow is basically storytelling. Great. And we see that our chinding are basically lengthened. So if we use the child and log got something, oops, not log info, got something, and we see that everything inside, and we see that the entire string is being embedded into the output of the JSON. Now, one more thing important. We can say child level equals trace. And if I say child trace, some detail, whatever, I get a trace. But if I do log trace, I get nothing. Which brings me to one of the things that it's very hard for me to look when people do this. Oh my God, stop doing that. Stop doing that. It's not for logs. No, if you do that, you're already in a very, very, very severe position to fail your job interview with me. No, why? Because you're composing strings without even knowing if they're needed. Don't do it. Right, get rid of it. Right, okay. So together with the chindings, and the levels, and the time, and the sonic boom, Pino has presented a performance improvement of about 30% over legacy loggers. 40%.
Okay, here's a small bonus for you YouTube watchers, something that I intended to show in the convention, but didn't have time to, so just ran to the summary. But basically, I promised to show how a developer can run locally services that speed output of JSON streams without suffering. Here's an example of such service. It's a service that sadly never went to production, so I have it on my computer, but basically you can see that the web interface is started, and when I'm shutting it down, we can see all the messages of the graceful shutdown. Well, so far so good. It's just not very convenient to read it like this. But if I pipe it into something called Pinopretty, which is a NPM package installed globally, just a simple NPM package, it's basically taking through the std in the JSON, and through the std out, it outputs a beautified output. We can see that it's putting the time here, we can put in the info, and we can see the channel through which the messages are being emitted. And so far so good, but it's very configurable. So since it's so configurable, I written for myself even better prettifier, and which looks like this. I got the level in front, I got the time. You don't need the date, just the time. If the date changes while you're running things locally, you are doing something wrong, you should check yourself. There is the channel through which the message is emitted, and here is the message, and more information appears here, and here's the graceful shutdown, and everything is fine. So that's what I wanted to show.
Let's just sum up. Logs our feature of the program, that's what I forgot to say. Our feature of the program, there are data streams. Everything emitted there is an event and is read mostly, first and foremost, before they even get to us, by machines. If we get that and work with that, we get better results. Thank you very much. You've been great. Thank you.